unions were bad and choices were good. In fact, the American middle class has had a long love affair with choice. We like the idea that anything is possible if we make the right choices. We like the idea that we control our destiny, that life can be predictable, and hard work will always be rewarded. And so we choose very carefully, and we like having lots of things to choose from. Churches, grocery stores, cars, houses. We like markets, and we like choices. So in 1996, when the Charter School Act passed in North Carolina, in my third year of teaching, I didn't see it as a problem. It seemed like an exciting development, actually. More choice. I remember thinking my principal seemed uncharacteristically paranoid when he told me this development was tragic and would lead to resegregation. One of my closest friends left my school to teach at a charter school, and I might have followed, but I could never get a straight answer about the retirement benefits or the leave policies. A few charter schools popped up in Raleigh: Magellan, Middle, Exploris, Raleigh Charter. And while they did seem pretty white and pretty upper middle class, I wasn't worried about the quality of education being provided there. In the last 20 years, though, stories about charter schools have wafted into my consciousness, and the narrative has become more and more discomforting. It started with a colleague's spouse who was at a charter school in Durham. I should say these anecdotes are purposely vague. I just don't want to receive a defamation lawsuit. That right there should tell you something. This school was in high demand. The admission lottery was intense. Lots of nice marketing materials that said all the right words, and the school tours were on point. But he related that behind the scenes there was all kinds of dysfunction. The charter board had just a few families running it. None of them were educators. And nepotism was a real problem. Some years they focused more on athletics than academics. Meanwhile, there were no custodians, and classrooms were getting filthy. He soon left to return to the traditional public schools. There was my former student who excitedly went to Texas to teach at a KIPP school in a low-income area. She was so excited to save the world in this innovative and demanding environment. 2 years later, she came back to Raleigh, wrung out, disillusioned, and disturbed. It seemed clear there was something intense about that model, just not sustainable. There was my tour of a prestigious charter high school, where teachers were clearly empowered and innovation was evident. But then I learned the way they keep great teachers is by raising hundreds of thousands of private dollars year in, year out, just to meet the Wake County pay scale. What an incredible opportunity cost. There was my conversation with a Wake County official that told me that Wake County Public Schools literally writes checks for $3.8 million a month to charter schools. I knew charter schools drained money from traditional schools, I just didn't realize how literal that process was. But I guess the final straw was this summer, when 3 things happened. I talked to a principal from Indiana and asked him about the charter school movement there. He struck me as a neoliberal type, and so his answer startled me. He said, "Yeah, we're kind of over that. We've realized it doesn't really work out." I learned that a 23-year-old recent college grad I knew had decided to leave her corporate job and become an elementary school teacher. She was quickly hired and started full-time teaching at a charter school this fall. She has not had a single day of teacher preparation. She didn't even really like to babysit. She likely does not know about Piaget and stages of child development, Erikson's theory of psychosocial awareness, Vygotsky's social cultural theory, not about phonemic awareness, not about schema theory. The school had enough enrolled to have 4 kindergarten classes, but did not have a physical location as of June of this year. It's now functioning at a church. She reports the school is kind of a quote-unquote dumpster fire, but her colleagues are nice. She has since decided that teaching small children is not really quote-unquote her thing, but will remain employed the rest of this year. I'm worried about those children. And I'm worried about the children I met at a campground this summer. We camp there every year, and there's always a couple dozen kids running around. I started asking them where they went to school. My kids were the only school kids that went to traditional public school. A good number of the kids didn't go to school at all. They were homeschooled. When one of their moms found out I was a teacher, she divulged to me that history was a subject they didn't really, quote unquote, do, because no one in the family really cared about it. Now, as a social studies teacher, I not only worried about the kids, I worried about our republic. So it's taken me 20 years, but I'm finally realizing the limited utility of choice. Question: which type of schools consistently demonstrate better educational outcomes when you control for variables such as income, race, and educational attainment of the parent? According to recent polls, most parents would get this question wrong. The answer is traditional public schools, not private or charter schools. Research shows that charter schools vary widely in quality and that private school students' educational outcomes are below those of public school students. Many educational consumers don't realize that private school teachers are typically not certified, and charter and private teachers earn lower salaries than public school teachers. How did consumers get such positive impressions of private and charter education, despite their less than impressive academic track record? Simple: branding. Charter and private schools must attract students, and to do so they put a lot of time and energy into marketing. They produce well-designed brochures, carefully staged and timed tours, and control what teachers can say about the school outside of school hours. They also create application processes that create an impression of scarcity and exclusivity, a tried and true driver of increasing demand. Marketing shapes community perception, and that perception becomes reality, even if teacher turnover and test scores tell a different story. The truth is that educating children is a complicated stew of pedagogy, educational theory, and healthy doses of edutainment, a mastery of child development stages, social psychology, and nuanced behavior management. Given that fact, a parent at a school tour is a bit like a single guy looking for a date at a bar. They really want to make the right choice, but it's easy to get distracted by variables that on the surface seem important, but will matter very little in the long run. Alternatively, public schools do not flaunt, market, or gloat. And while a high percentage of parents are happy with their public school, 77% give their child's school an A or a B, happy news is rarely the subject of conversation. In America, we have been raised on a steady diet of choice equals freedom equals good. That mentality has led us to have supermarkets with 175 choices of salad dressings and 285 types of cookies. Ironically, research shows that an excess of choice can actually make us less, not more, satisfied. Market analysts believe that one explanation for the success of stores like Trader Joe's is that they help consumers navigate what is now known as the choice conundrum. I would suggest that we have met the choice conundrum threshold in some of the more metropolitan areas of our state. This became evident to me when a former student informed me she was moving to Charlotte, North Carolina. She inquired about which high school would be best for her daughter. When I informed her of the complex choices to be made, even within the traditional public school system, let alone considering charter and private, she became alarmed. It was clear that there would require hours of research on schools before she could even begin considering which neighborhoods to look for a home in. And we weren't even sure where her research should begin. What does it cost us when we pursue our individual freedom and agency rather than committing to the social and communal institutions around us? In Barry Schwartz's book, The Paradox of Choice, he asserts that Americans are paying for increased affluence and freedom with a substantial decrease in the quality and quantity of community. What was once given by family, neighborhood, and workplace must now be achieved and actively cultivated on an individual basis. The social fabric is no longer a birthright, but has become a series of deliberated and demanding choices. What if the school choice movement is just a dead-end rabbit hole that on the surface seems ideal, but at the core will lead to a debilitating choice paradox that leaves us never quite feeling certain or satisfied? I actually cannot find the last page of my notes. So I think I left them in my bag right behind me, but rather than rifle through them, I will roughly tell you what I wanted to say for the rest of these comments. I apologize for my lack of preparation, but I think it's ironic that I'm a teacher. I think the rest of my comments focused on one idea, which is that another problem with our charter schools, especially now that we have a K-12 school that is coming to Wake County, is that we lose our scale of economies of scale and efficiency. For example, most of our charter schools and private schools are actually quite small. I happen to teach at a comprehensive high school with 2,600 students, and we have 19 people in my department. We offer 5 AP courses. That allows me to be a specialist in an AP course. It allows me to teach 2 sections a day, perhaps, sometimes 3. And I've been curating and specializing in that course development for years. A lot of our teachers are able to go be assessors at AP evaluations in summers. If you think about charter schools or private schools, which are much smaller in scale, those economies of scale are lost, and you have teachers that might be teaching 4 or 5 different preparations every day, different preparations each semester, and you can see how efficiencies are lost there. You get those same efficiencies that are lost when you're talking about special education or meeting children's needs for a speech pathology or counseling or autism. Those positions are available at our school, and so you shouldn't be surprised when we find kids who need those services, because we have someone who can meet those needs in the school building. And I really do wonder why we are using public money to support schools that cannot meet the basic spirit and letter of the law in terms of what we owe disabled students. No public money should be going to a school that discriminates subtly or intentionally, or is unable to meet the needs of disabled students who attend that school. So, it's taken me 20 years, but now I fully and totally understand it. That choices have consequences. And choices and those consequences are not always positive ones. And so the unintentional result of choice is something that the middle class needs to fully be aware of and own, and quit thinking so simplistically about the notion that choice is always good. Thank you.
Good morning. Angie's a tough act to follow. I'm Justin Parmenter. I'm here from Charlotte. I'm very happy to have the opportunity to be with you here this morning. Thank you for giving up a quarter of your weekend to come and be a part of this important conversation. Congratulations to Public Schools First NC for making it 10 years, and for the resources that you provide to those of us who want to learn more about what's going on in North Carolina. Public Schools First NC has a great series of web pages called Quick Facts, which I found to be a really important way to stay informed about what's happening in North Carolina. So I'm here to talk about maybe what could be an alternative to the current system that we see in North Carolina. Christine touched on the 1996 legislation, which kind of opened the door, or opened maybe Pandora's box. I think initially, things were a little bit different, and for me, trying to understand what's happening now, it's important to look back at that early legislation and think about what was the spirit behind that law, and has that spirit changed? Are we honoring the original intent of that legislation? In the original bill, UC mentioned the intent to increase learning opportunities, to encourage the use of different and innovative teaching methods, to provide parents and students with expanded choices in the types of educational opportunities that are available within the public school system. That original legislation doesn't say anything about creating schools that fail students who need the most help. It doesn't say anything about increasing racial and economic segregation in our state. But those are some of the outcomes that we've seen, particularly in the last years since the cap was lifted, and we've turned to kind of a Wild West approach to charter policy in North Carolina, where, not to mix metaphors, but they're kind of springing up like mushrooms everywhere after the rain. And very few of those new charters, especially that are opening, are focused on being truly innovative or in offering something that's different from what is already available, depending on how you define those differences. That to me would indicate that perhaps there's some other motivation at work beyond what was initially written into law. I think we have another alternative right here before our eyes, which can do all the things the original legislation called for, and also maintain a level of accountability and offering opportunities to students who need additional support, working towards the racial and economic integration that we know is so important for our students and for their success. And I'm talking about magnet schools. I am a product of magnet schools in the St. Louis public school system. My story is that I was raised by a very conservative, religious parents, and in St. Louis I was enrolled in a very wealthy private school on a scholarship. And so my family didn't have a lot of money, but my parents, for, you know, whatever their motivation was, they wanted me to be in that setting. And so I went to school with kids who, you know, perhaps their pockets weren't the same as mine, but, you know, outwardly they looked just like I did. So what happened was the scholarship money dried up after a while. And so my parents decided to enroll me in St. Louis City Schools in the magnet program. And at the time, I think things have changed since then, but this was in the 90s. And at the time, St. Louis had a busing program, which I think was similar to what we had in Charlotte before that was dismantled. And so we had students from the city who were bused to suburban schools, or they had, you know, they had that alternative. And then we had white county students like myself who were provided transportation to go to schools in the city. And so for the last 3 years of my schooling, I was enrolled in a college prep program, very stringent academically, but was also surrounded with students that, you know, I'd never gone to school with students who didn't look like me, and I was able to form lifelong friendships and really learn not about the world, a world that was kind of shielded, and where I was surrounded with people who were identical to me, but with, you know, with some variety and diversity in my life. And, you know, 30 years later, I find myself working in a magnet school in Charlotte, which is called Waddell Language Academy. The school that I work at now is a foreign language immersion school, and it's a K-8 school, and the way it works is that parents enroll their children through a lottery system, which I'll explain a little bit more about in a minute. And as kindergartners, they're enrolled either in Chinese, German, French, or Japanese. And from 5 years of age, they go to school and they're learning math, they're learning science, they're learning social studies in that target language. And so we have children who all day long they're speaking Japanese, and they're, you know, I've brought in a lot of visitors from different places to witness what's going on there. Actually had the honor of escorting then Senator Dan Bishop on a tour of our school, and he, like everybody else who comes there and sees 5-year-old children, you know, speaking to each other in Chinese, are amazed that this is something that we can accomplish within the public school system. My school is one of 67 full magnet schools in the Charlotte-Mecklenburg system. We have language immersion schools like the one that I work at. We also have schools that are focused on IB, STEM and STEAM, visual and performing arts. We have Montessori schools and leadership schools. They serve a total of 25,000 CMS students. And I would argue that it's the type of expanded choice of educational opportunities and innovative approaches to learning and teaching that was called for in the original charter legislation in 1996. In terms of the lottery that we use, CMS is, my understanding, CMS is one of very few districts in the country which awards seats to our magnet schools using SES. And the way that it works in Charlotte is there are 5 factors which go into determining levels of SES, high, medium, and low. And those factors are income, family structure, meaning single or dual parent household, home ownership, English language ability, and the highest educational attainment of an adult in the home. And so seats are awarded, seats are awarded through the lottery based on those factors. So as a result, you know, I see students in my classes, we have very wealthy, privileged students who are seated side by side with students who, you know, at any given time may be classified as homeless. I've seen parents come to Board of Education meetings in Charlotte-Mecklenburg and thank the board for helping to sustain the efforts of schools like ours and talk about the ways that that opportunity has changed the trajectory of the lives of their children and what they see as their opportunities in life and what's possible for them. So I think that through focusing on opportunities like what we have at the school that I work at and the other magnet programs in Charlotte, if we can be intentional about offering and maintaining programs that are specialized and innovative in that way, that are adequately resourced so that we can provide students with the learning experience that we want them to have, that we can work within our existing traditional public school system to provide the opportunities that our children need that will lead to the outcomes that we want, without cherry picking students, without avoiding students that are more of a challenge to serve, and without increasing segregation in our communities. So for me, the question is, it all comes back to what are really the goals behind the changes that we see taking place in our system. And I think if we want to honor the original intent, then we need to make some changes in what we're focusing on going forward. Thank you.
Well, hello and good morning. So my name is Tamika Walker Kelly. I am an elementary music specialist in Cumberland County. And one of the things that I want to offer to this conversation today is how this conversation impacts parents and students of color, because sometimes that gets lost in the choice conversation and around privatization of our public schools. So first I want to begin, of course, by acknowledging the historical context around privatization and school choice, and acknowledge that many parents and students of color have faced barriers, manufactured barriers around education access and equity in the educational experience. And that has historically been the case, and then unfortunately, it seems that we are heading back in that direction. Especially when it comes to public schools. And so I want to talk a little bit about how privatization groups are messaging parents of color by, of course, targeting, in contrast to public schools, by saying that they can offer smaller class sizes, individual access, a multitude of opportunities that supposedly the public school does not offer. For example, we have a private school in Cumberland County, Trinity Christian, which is one of the largest recipients of voucher money, that offers sports opportunities, but has also been in the news for the last few years of embezzlement and fraud of those voucher funds. And so what happens is when, especially at my school, which is a Title I school, predominantly students of color, is that when those students and families come back to our school, which I've seen many of them in my 12 years at the same school, many of them come back and they're frustrated and they're a little upset. They feel like there's been a bait and switch because their students don't actually have access to a whole well-rounded curriculum at this private or for-profit charter school that they have been promised. I've had a family come to me and say, you know, the child was in my course, and they come back and there's no access to arts. There's no access to consistent AP courses or high-level courses at that school. But also one of the things that also happens is that many of our students of color, once they go to these institutions, they are often pushed out of them. They actually exacerbate the school-to-prison pipeline based on their discipline practices, zero tolerance policies, for things that aren't culturally relevant to the communities that they claim to want to serve. For example, just in the news recently, we've seen several examples of students being disciplined and receiving demerits and things around hair. Okay. the way that their hair naturally grows out of their head. And even just showing up to take a school picture with their hair designed and styled in a way that is relative to the culture that they are from and grew up in. And so one of the things that we have to note and be really careful about watching is the face of parents of color who are out promoting school choice and privatization versus who gets the actual money. Because many times you will see a parent tell their story, and while they are talking about the individual success of their child in a school, many times that money doesn't filter back into the community like a public school does. And so we know that there are corporate interests, corporate organizations that are reaping the benefits of students of color being in these institutions, but not actually influencing the community and building the community in positive ways where there's a sustained effort of long-term gains for parents and students of color. And so one of the things that, in contrast, as a proud public school advocate, educator, and parent, the research shows that public schools are the right direction for our students, that all of our students, not just students of color, but all of our students, benefit from having diverse learning spaces. They benefit from having access and interactions with students of broad variety of experiences, diverse cultures, but also educators of color, which doesn't often happen in private schools or charter school environments. Also, we are in our public schools, because we are practitioners of reflective learning and constantly making sure that we are research-based, that we are developing our curriculum to be culturally relevant and responsive to the cultures that we serve, and so that all students can see themselves in the classrooms that they step into, which is extremely important. And then, of course, as educators, we are also doing professional development that allows us to be practitioners of culturally responsive and relevant educated, and teaching and practices and pedagogy, be it anti-racist, anti-bias, so that we aren't perpetuating those barriers that have historically kept students and parents of color outside of school and having access to those things. And then lastly, of course, but like Justin mentioned and Christine mentioned, our schools are very different than what someone who has not stepped into a public school recently thinks of a public school. A lot of people make public school decisions but have never been in one. And so there are many, many different modes of teaching going on in our public schools, magnet schools. Our school system today, Cumberland County, we're having a school choice fair, and we've got Fire Academy, we got math and science, we have IB, we have global studies, we have robotics. All of those different things that parents can choose from and students can choose from. We have virtual VR labs going on at my high school, which I'm so excited about. So there are, we are addressing 21st century learning, moving on to the 22nd, because, we cannot continue to prescribe to the model that we are just preparing kids for work. We're preparing kids for a global competitive society. We're preparing them to be whole, healthy human beings. And so one of the things is that when parents realize that, they want that diversity, they want that community. And so when they look at all the options and they consider them, they realize that public schools are the choice that meets those needs. And so that is one of the things that I wanted to offer to this conversation today. So thank you.
If you're a fan of The Office and you ever watched the fire safety episode, you'll know that Dwight Schrute hates PowerPoints. So I hope Dwight Schrute's not here today. My name is Stu Egan. I am a Winston-Salem, Forsyth County school teacher. I teach English at West Forsyth High School. I am also a proud parent of 2 kids in public schools. And I'm going to talk a little bit about school performance grading system that we have here in North Carolina that predominantly is shown on the school report cards. I've made arguments in the past, I think they're fairly valid, that what our North Carolina General Assembly has done in the last probably 8-9 years since they've won a majority for many of the people who came in and started these D-forms, as I like to call them, that they've done a really, really good job at shielding what the public actually sees about what's great about our public schools. And that if you're going to standardize what a public school is, then you need to go ahead and start standardizing students. And each teacher up here will probably tell you they have not ever taught a standardized student. And so when you have things like school report cards, when you have the least transparent voucher system in the United States, when you have an ESA system that literally is unregulated, and then you have a school report card system that takes achievement on arbitrary tests over growth, then you're going to be able to manipulate how people look at public schools. You're also going to be able to influence how they might think about where to send their kids, despite never having gone into those public schools. If you've never been to the state report card system, one thing I do want you to notice is that when you go up there and actually get onto the site, you will see that it is filtered through SAS, which is right down the road. And SAS also is the outfit that is contracted by the state of North Carolina through DPI to give us our EVOS scores, which is a value-added measurement, of which no teacher has ever known the algorithm or the formula by which those are measured. And so when schools are being measured and students are being measured by very anomalous criteria, we tend not to know exactly what goes into those measurements, but the public very well is aware of what the results of those measurements might end up being. Take a look at that. 80% achievement on certain tests, 20% growth. And it got changed this past summer. It's on a 15-point scale now. But it was slated to go to a 10-point scale this year. The number of schools that you would have had D's and F's would have seismically increased. The number of schools that had A's and B's would have decreased. Now, to go from an A to a B or to change that very, very quickly based on the material, the criteria and measurements we have right now, is incredibly difficult. Just ask the Innovative School District. Take a look at what growth is measured by what is supposed to be this year. If you look over there, it says English 2, Math 1, Math 3. Actually, this year, growth was depicted by English 2 and Math 1 only. There are a lot more subjects being taught out there. Actually, biology used to be there. They took it out. Biology used to be the highest score for most schools. Taking it out changed their growth, therefore ended up having an effect on the school report card. Here's another interesting fact. Your high-flying students tend to take Math 1 in middle school. And there are a lot of students who don't take Math 3, they go straight to pre-cal. And so what you have is a rather jaded, slighted view of what growth really is. That's what you see on school report cards. Colors dictate if they met or exceeded growth. The letter grade obviously is the school report card grade. There is a reason why real estate agents are not allowed to tell you what public school service a certain house you might be looking at. Because so much real estate gets bumped up and bumped down as far as its value by school systems. Just go work in the Atlanta area for a little bit. Now take a look at that. North Carolina is one of only 16 states to have a school performance grading system. We're the only one that measures achievement over growth. That's seismic in the entire United States. And what those school report cards and those school achievement and the school performance grades really show is just what poverty does to our kids. And if you want to ignore that, then you're going to ignore everything else. We have so many things that are coming in externally that our kids have to deal with that we're placing on a lot of school systems to take care of. That was last year's. That's not this year. That's this year. After all those reforms, this is what we have. About 1/5 of our kids in public schools exist at the poverty level or below the poverty level. In Winston-Salem, it's almost 25%. Let's say for a second. My argument has been, if you're going to tell the public how well schools are doing or not doing, and still putting out the least transparent voucher system that there is, you're pretty much setting up your own advertising campaign. That's the amount of money right now that's supposed to go into the voucher systems each year. By the time 26, 27 comes around, we'll have spent almost $1 billion. Ironically, less than half the money's been claimed. And we're still adding to it. And the state legislature will not put that money back into the school systems, public school systems, which right now are operating on a budget for last year's monies without recurring funds being there, with non-recurring funds being there. If that's not enabling, I don't know what is. About 5 or 6 weeks ago, the Wall Street Journal had an op-ed by a man named Baker Mitchell, who runs the Roger Bacon Academies, which has 4 campuses here in North Carolina. And he was making the argument that charter schools were just as, if not more diverse than traditional public schools. And what he was doing was kind of tell you a little bit on the surface level what was happening. So, for instance, if it was 50-50 between white and African American in here, and I went outside and told somebody who hadn't looked in here that it's diverse, it's 50-50, and then that person walked in and saw all the white people sitting over here and all the African American people sitting over here, I would tell you a different story. That's one of the beautiful things about walking through a high school cafeteria at lunch. Elementary school cafeteria at lunch. That can be some of the most beautiful things you ever see in your life. The inclusion that goes on there. But what Baker Mitchell didn't know is that if you actually drill down on charter schools at the school report card site, where you get the school performance grades, it'll give you the breakdown. And what he was actually bragging about was sorely not true. If you look at the school report cards and the school performance grades of every charter school that had a grade this year but was in existence last year, and broke them down, which I did, over 170, and you're going to find this. That's not diversity. At the same time, people are thinking they're supposed to go to charter schools because they've been told this about public schools. That's compliments of Chris Nordstrom. But you can do the math yourself. It's pretty straightforward. The way that things are reported for public schools versus the reality of public schools is usually done by the people in power. People in power really want North Carolina to be the biggest petri dish of every reform that's out there. So think of it this way. I've got a high school senior. She looks like her mom, thank God. Got her analytical brain. She's about to turn in her first college application on Tuesday. It's pretty exciting. I'm kind of starting to have a little bit of my little girl's gonna be gone. It's interesting how many things they want to know about her that have absolutely nothing quantifiable attached to her. They want to see her artwork. They want to interview her. They want to see her extracurriculars. They want to see her service. They'd like to know what she's done in the community. And it's weird, even the college I went to is no longer accepting the SAT, which has changed, I don't know how many times since I took it in high school, that to actually measure this year's scores to any historical data is ludicrous. Yet we do it with our schools all the time. In order to fuel a narrative that's enabling somebody else. Thank you.